All right, so in this video, we're going to make a Voronoi diagram a different way. So we're going to put everything on the coordinate grid, and we're going to find it just with the equations. And as a bonus, I can actually write out what the inequalities will be that will describe the Voronoi diagram, although it gets a little hairier as we add more and more points. So to start out, let's define a few random points. I'm just going to make up -3 comma 5. Let's do that with an A. And then we'll have 2 comma 1. You get to be called point B. And then the next point, -2 comma negative. That's pretty far. Doesn't really matter. Down here, labeled as point C. So what I'm going to do is find the perpendicular bisectors. And so what I can do is first put the midpoints on the graph. And so you can just use your midpoint formula where you add the two x values and divide by 2, add the two y values and divide by 2, and you'll get your midpoints. So I'm going to do the midpoint between A and B. If I add the x values, I get -1 because it's -3 plus 2. Cut that in half, I get -0.5 or -0.5. I look at A and B and add the y values. 5 plus 1 is 6. Cut that in half, I get 3. I'm going to call this the midpoint of AB, so MAB. All right, let's do the same thing for B and C. So between B and C, the x values add up to 0. The y values add up to -2. Cut that in half, I get -1. That's the midpoint of BC. Then I've got A and C. If you add up the x values of A and C, you get -5. Cut that in half, -2.5. Add up the y values of A and C, you get 2. Cut that in half, you get 1. And that's MAC, M-A-C. Now I have my midpoints. And the bisector is going to go through the midpoint. Perpendicular means it goes at a right angle. And that means that whatever slope the edges of the triangle have, you do the opposite reciprocal slope to find the perpendicular bisector. So let's focus on them one at a time. From A to B goes down 4 and right 5. Down 4 and right 5. And so if I write that as a slope, my slope of AB is down 4 and right 5. So my perpendicular slope switches opposite and reciprocal. So I'm going to have a positive, and it's going to switch the 4 and the 5. So it'll be 5 over 4. It's going to go through the midpoint. So my midpoint is what I'm going to use when I write my point slope form. Point slope form is your friend. It will help you write these equations much easier. So my midpoint has a y value of 3. My slope is perpendicular, so I switch it around to 5/4. And the midpoint has an x value of 0.5, of -0.5. So I do double negative to write plus 0.5. So that red line you can see goes right through the midpoint and it goes perpendicular to AB. Now we do the same thing for BC. From B to C, we have a rise of 4 and a run also of 4. It goes up 1 and over 1. So that means it has a slope of +1. Opposite reciprocal would be -1. Then I'm going to go through that midpoint and I'll write y plus 1 equals -1 times x minus 0. The -0 is optional, but I just put it in there to show the whole point slope form. You can see the red line and the blue line intersect at a single point in the middle of the triangle. Same idea with the last last side, from A to C. What is my slope? From A to C goes down by 8 and over by 1. Down by 8 over by 1. So that's a -8 over 1, switching to a +1 over 8. 8. So I'm going to write y, and then the MAC has a y value of 1, so y minus 1 equals 1 over 8 times x minus the midpoint of MAC is 2.5, sorry, negative 2.5, so minus negative 2.5, or I could write positive 2.5. All three of the lines intersect at a single point right there. And really, we will ask you to find the point of intersection. And I showed you in another video how to find the point of intersection. It's just bringing your substitution skills back. But now I want to focus instead on the Voronoi diagram. So once you've found those equations of the perpendicular lines, and once you've drawn them, you've created your Voronoi diagram. You just need to shade in the different zones. So this zone up here is above the AB bisector, and it's above the AC bisector. So that would belong to point A. This point over here is to the right of the AB bisector, and it's to the right of the BC bisector. And same idea down here. This point is below AC's bisector and below BC's bisector. So that would be how you can shade by hand what the different Voronoi cells are. You can actually use Desmos to do that. And I just want to show you this because you have all the information you need. I'm going to use inequalities to shade in the different areas. So what I'm going to say is your y is greater than the green line. So I'm focusing on cell A first. So I want to be above the green line. And the green line has an equation right here. I can copy and paste this. But you see how that's off a little bit? It's because I didn't solve the green equation for y. Well, how do I solve the green equation for y? I add 1. So I just go plus 1 on that. And there's a little bit more of a problem. This also goes, I have another perpendicular bisector between A and B. So I restrict the domain using these squiggly brackets, and I say that that is only true when the y value is also above the red line, because the red line is the perpendicular bisector between A and C. That didn't quite work out because I didn't solve for y in the red equation, so I have to add 3 to solve for y. Now I've just told Desmos to shade in the area that's above those two perpendicular bisectors. Okay? Now I can do the same thing for point B. Point B is below the bisector that I just did. So let's just copy what we just typed in. Below this bisector, so we have to change a greater than to a less than to make it below. But it's also above the blue bisector. So I go squiggly brackets. You are also above the blue bisector. Make sure I solve that for y by subtracting 1 to get rid of the minus 1, and that shades in that region. Now you don't really need to do the third one because if you shade 2 of them, the third one is kind of shaded in the negative space anyway. But just to show completeness here, the third one is going to be below the line I just did. So I copy, switch the direction, and it's also below, is this the green line? Yeah, it's also below the green line. I had to make sure I solve for that by the green line. I had a minus 1, so I do a plus 1, and I just created the Voronoi diagram. It gets a little bit more annoying when you add a fourth point in, but just like I showed in the constructions video, if I bring a fourth point into the game, let's just give it another point like negative 5 comma 1. This point right here, B, is definitely not going to impact B. It's only going to impact A and C. So I would just find a perpendicular bisector between A and C and a perpendicular bisector between A and B, And I would use the perpendicular bisector I already know between A and C, and that would carve out a new uh, segment. Really, roughly speaking, I can sort of sketch out what that would look like. We would have AD's perpendicular bisector, DC's perpendicular bisector, hitting something like that along with the perpendicular bisector of AC. And so then you've created this new zone right in here that would belong to point D. So there you go. That was showing you how to find perpendicular bisectors and construct a Voronoi diagram strictly using the equations. You got to know how to do both ways, constructing it by hand, constructing it with the equations, and finding the point of intersection either way as well. All right, thank you for watching. Please comment if there's anything I can do to